One of the best Star Wars games of all time, after the Knights of the Old Republic games of course, was Star Wars Republic Commando. From the unique artistic style to the Mandalorian-themed soundtrack to the gritty tone and presentation, there's so much that makes this game distinctly awesome. An essential part of the experience is being put in the boots of a clone commando, an elite badass in charge of a squad of 4. The experience is thrilling enough that ever since the game's release, clone commandos have had a thriving base of dedicated fans, which has resulted in lots of commando lore. In this video, we'll be laying out every last scrap of said commando lore, analysing the Republic's elite units in detail.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
You have been born into dangerous times. A sharp mind can be the key to survival. But as often as not, it will be your inherent physical traits that win the day. And in this regard, you will be superior to your more common brethren. For you are a commander, an elite unit, something truly special.
During the early stages of the Kaminoans' clone army project, Jango Fett raised concerns that the modified, behaviorally conditioned rank-and-file clone troopers would be unable to complete special operations missions that required a greater degree of independence and creativity. On his urging, the Kaminoans created the ARC troopers, who lacked behavioral conditioning and had personalities that were pretty much identical to Jango's. But the first batch of ARC troopers, the Null class, was a failure, and the Kaminoans had very little faith in the Alpha class, their replacements. They allowed Jango to train his ARC troopers, but they nonetheless set out to create their own batch of commandos, which they hoped would be more reliable. These commandos were envisioned as striking a balance between the hyper-independent ARCs and the orders-driven regular troopers. They were allowed a greater degree of creativity and independent thought than the regs, but they were trained to be more loyal and committed to following orders than the ARCs. As with the regs, they were indoctrinated with absolute loyalty to the Republic, which the Kaminoans hoped would make them more predictable and easier to control than the ARC troopers. Furthermore, much as they allowed Jango to train the ARC troopers personally, they allowed outsiders to handle the training of clone commandos as well. During the early days of the Clone Commando program, Jango Fett recruited 100 elite mercenaries to train the commandos. 75 of them were Mandalorians, while many of the remainder were Corellians, but all were the best in their field. Fett and the Kaminoans promised them all extraordinary rewards and a place in history, and in exchange, these trainers would not be allowed to leave Kamino until the secret army had been deployed. As befitting these harsh conditions, the recruiters became known as the Cuy'val Dar, a Mando'a word meaning those who no longer exist. After a while, most were believed dead by their families and friends. Each trainer was assigned a company of 104 clone commandos to train out of the 10,400 total clone commandos, and for the next 10 years, they each trained their batches in their own unique ways. Taking inspiration from the Kaminoan Iowa, which hunted in pods to bring down larger prey, the Kaminoans had each commando raised as part of a squad of 4. Commandos were trained to see their squad mates as their brothers and themselves as pieces of a whole person. Thus, commando squads became incredibly tight-knit. Under the guidance of the Cuy'val Dar, they also became extremely skilled. Their training was beyond brutal. Some commandos were killed during live fire training exercises, and all commandos were subjected to brutal torture to prepare them to resist interrogation. Clone commandos were not only experts in a plethora of combat techniques, but also in infiltration, assassination, demolition, emergency medical care, and much more. They were elite in the fullest sense of the word. Nonetheless, their skill sets weren't the same as those of ordinary troopers. They didn't perform well as part of a larger army nor on open battlefields. As commandos, they were trained to work independently, and they tended to disappoint when their commanders expected them to work the same way as the regs. But they were highly effective when their skills were used properly. But the clone commandos weren't just incredibly skilled, they were well equipped as well. Unlike ARC troopers, who used slightly modified regular clone armor, clone commandos used advanced katarn-class armor, which was a marked improvement over the standard kit. The black body glove over which the suit was assembled was tougher, and the armor itself was thicker, made of blast-resistant duraplast, capable of shielding the wearer from extreme heats and cold, and it featured a multitude of sensors for optimal performance. Like the standard clone kit, it was composed of 20 pieces, a flexible placard, boots, and a helmet. The boots were rated for all manner of terrain, and the knuckle plate featured a hidden vibro blade for close encounters. All told, the kit weighed 20 kilograms and it was worth 100,000 credits on the black market. It came in 3 versions. These were the Katarn Mark I, released at the start of the war, the Katarn Mark II, which provided additional protection against EMP weapons and Verpine shatter guns, and the Katarn Mark III, which was almost completely blast resistant and could protect the wearer against grenades. The helmet of the Katarn suit featured full communication systems, an air filter, a heads-up display in the visor, a night vision mode, built-in electro-binoculars, and a tactical spot lamp. Members of the squad synchronized their helmets, allowing their HUDs to display each other's vitals, enabling commandos to be able to tell when one of their brethren needed help. Like with standard clone helmets, the HUDs of Katarn-class helmets interfaced with the targeting systems of standard-issue blasters, but Katarn helmets had the unique ability to independently analyze and calculate targeting information for non-standard weapons, allowing it to generate specialized targeting reticules. The Katarn-class kit came with a heavy-duty survival pack, which was heavily customizable but generally contained plenty of spare armor, explosives, emergency medical supplies, provisions and survival gear, an oxygen tank for operations in a vacuum, and even a portable communications array. It also contained a personal shield generator, which generated deflector shields that allowed commandos to take a few hits before they started suffering injuries. The clone commando kit also contained a vast arsenal of weapons. Their primary weapon was the DC-17M interchangeable weapons system, a versatile weapon that could function as a rapid-firing blaster rifle, a sniper rifle, and an anti-armor grenade launcher. Commandos also carried DC-15S blaster pistols as sidearms. These weren't nearly as impressive, but they had a recharging power cell that meant they never ran out of ammo, making them a useful last resort. Many commandos preferred non-standard weapons over the DC-17M and DC-15S, however. Alternative primary weapons used by clone commandos included, but weren't limited to, Verpine shatterguns, Trandoshan ACP array guns and repeaters, shotguns of various models, LG-50 concussion rifles, vibro daggers, Geonosian force pikes, DC-17 hand blasters, Westar-20 blaster pistols, LS-50 heavy ACP repeaters, and Kaminoan saber darts. On top of all that, clone commandos used lots of explosives. Grenades used by commandos included standard frag and EMP rounds, ion grenades, stun grenades, flashbangs, sonic detonators, and thermal detonators, while for high-yield explosives, commandos used standard det packs, bore bangs, AP micromines, and ribbon charges. All told, clone commandos were armed to the teeth at all times. As with the ARC troopers, clone commandos' experiences during training not only shaped their performance, but their personalities as well. Each Cuy'val Dar trainer had their own unique approach. Cal Scarada and Rav Bralor saw their trainees as their sons and treated them as such, encouraging them and making clear they cared about their commandos, though they still subjected them to harsh training. Some, most notably Wallon Val, were particularly brutal, with their aim being to make their commandos instinctual survivors. Many of Val's commandos hated him because of how brutal he was, but his training paid off. Commandos who trained under him had a much higher rate of survival than the others. Additionally, the Cuy'val Dar instilled the clone commandos with a sense of culture and community, believing it important to give soldiers something bigger and more personal to be part of. As most of the Cuy'val Dar were Mandalorian, this meant that most clone commandos were raised as Mandalorians, taught to speak Mando'a as a second language, and raised with Mandalorian values. A lot of regular clones disliked clone commandos for this, especially after the Mandalorian protectors joined the Separatists and started killing clones in large numbers. We tend to agree that the Mandabu commandos were cringe, at the very least, especially since indoctrination into a culture that glorified their trauma and slavery as badass warrior heroics was the last thing any clone needed, but oh well. Not all commandos were Mandabus, of course. Those trained under the Corellian trainers adopted Corellian cultural traits instead, for example. But regardless, clone commandos were a breed apart, both from the Regs and the Arcs. Commanders tended to see the Arcs a bit like the Kaminoans did, as unstable and overrated, while they looked down on regular clones for not being as tough or independent. These animosities were mutual, and they weren't helped by the fact that the Commandos were the Kaminoans' clear favourites. Like ARC troopers, clone commandos weren't part of the regular Grand Army of the Republic. Instead, they composed the bulk of the Republic's Special Operations Brigade, which had its own commando structure. The basic unit was a squad of 4 commandos, including and led by a sergeant. 5 squads made up a troop, which was typically commanded by a Jedi commander, and 5 troops made a company, which was typically led by a designated commando commander. 5 companies made a commando group, which was placed under the leadership of a Jedi general. There were 10 commando groups in the Spec Ops Brigade, which was commanded by Jedi General Ali Gunzay. If you were paying special attention just now, you might notice that that would only be 5,000 commandos, just half of the original number of clone commandos. That would be because half of all clone commandos died in the first Battle of Geonosis, for reasons we'll discuss in a bit. For now though, let's talk about all the known squads and the commandos that comprise them. There are a bunch that were wiped out or nearly wiped out, many of them on Geonosis, and were subsequently dissolved, with their surviving members reassigned to new squads. Some squads, as we'll discuss later, were entirely composed of sole survivors. These were known as mongrel squads by other commandos, as they tended to lack the same level of brotherly connection ordinary commando squads had. Nearly 2 entire squads were wiped out in one early mission to Ord Mantell, with only one commando, RC-1013, surviving. RC-1013, or Sarge, was later assigned to be the leader of Iowa Squad. The rest of this squad consisted of RC-2088, or Zag, and the commandos Taito and Dikut. That last commando's nickname is Mando'a for dumbass, by the way, and we'd absolutely love to know the story of how he earned that nickname. Anyway, Iowa Squad seemingly had much better luck than Sarge's original squad, and it held together to the end of the Clone Wars when it fought under General Travis in the Battle of Garki, following which the members of Iowa Squad killed Travis in compliance with Order 66. Of the squads that were nearly wiped out on Geonosis, 1, the original squad led by RC-1309, or Niner, suffered a fatality before the war even began. Commando RC-8028, or 28, was killed in an explosives accident during training on Kamino. The rest of his squad consisted of RC-1304, or 04, and 2 other commandos nicknamed Sev and DD, one of whom was 28's replacement. All of these commandos, except Niner, were killed on the first day of the Clone Wars. Niner wasn't the only clone commando to be the sole survivor from his original squad. RC-3222, or Aiton, was originally a member of Prudai's squad, but he also lost all his brothers on Geonosis. The next squad he was assigned to was wiped out as well, leaving him as the sole survivor of 2 squads in a row. Terok's squad and Theta squad were both also all but wiped out on Geonosis, leaving behind only RC-8015, or Phi, and RC-1136, or Darman. 3 months into the war, Niner, Aiton, Phi, and Darman were all grouped together under the banner of Omega Squad. You might remember these guys being the main characters of the Republic Commando novels. Known for their spooky black Night Ops armor and their unusual set of skills, the commandos of Omega Squad had plenty of adventures during the Clone Wars. They were responsible for infiltration missions on Kalura, Fest, Olanet, and Gaftakar, counter-terrorism operations on Coruscant and elsewhere, and one member of the squad, Darman, was responsible for getting a Jedi Padawan pregnant. During the war, Fi suffered a severe brain injury that left him disabled for the rest of his life, and he was replaced in Omega Squad by RC-5108/8843, or Core. Core was an interesting character in his own right. He was originally a regular clone and lost both his forearms to an explosive, forcing him to get droid arms as prosthetics, which he liked to use to sharpen knives. Omega Squad was part of Arca Company within 05 Commando Battalion. Other squads in Arca Company included Veshok Squad and the infamous Delta Squad, the members of which were widely considered the best clone commandos in the whole army. Delta Squad was composed of RC-1138 or Boss, RC-1140 or Fixer, RC-1207 or Sev, and RC-1262 or Scorch. None of these men need an introduction, being the main characters of Star Wars Republic Commando. Delta Squad was one of the few squads not to lose a single member on Geonosis, and indeed, they didn't lose anyone until the last days of the war, when Sev went MIA on Kashyyyk. Some of the other squads that weren't so lucky included Iowa 3 Squad, not to be confused with the ordinary Iowa Squad, which lost everyone except the Commando Jez on Geonosis. The same was true for Bravo Squad, which lost everyone except for the Commando Ram, and Gamma Squad, which lost everyone except the Commando Stoker. Gamma Squad was rebuilt with new members, but the fates of the others are unknown. There was also Foxtrot Group, a larger unit led by Clone Commando Captain RC-5576-39, also known as Gregor, which was almost completely destroyed in the Battle of Sarish. Some of the more obscure Commando squads included Kilo Squad, one of the first deployed, of which next to nothing is known. Nast, Vevut, and Aura squads, which were composed almost entirely of Rav Bradlaw's trainees, and Orek, Aquila, Yayax, and Manka squads, all of which were only mentioned in passing. There was also Ion Team, which participated in the Battle of Mokana at the end of the war, and was only really notable for refusing to execute Order 66, saving the lives of Jedi Generals Rowan Shrine, Bolch Attack, and Padawan Oli Starstone. There were also a few Clone Commando squads with rather unique circumstances and specialities. One was the High Orbit Precision Entry Unit, or HOPE Squad, which specialized in deploying onto planets via orbital drop pods, ODST style. There was also Tark Squad, which was notable for not being composed of Jango Fett clones at all. How the hell this unit came to be is unknown, but it consisted of Thrissian mercenaries trained by Sarius Torn, a member of the Thrissian Sun Guard. Tark Squad participated in the Battle of Sky alongside Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Lastly, Canon had introduced us to the Bad Batch, a member of mutated clone commandos with their own unique skills and personalities. We've talked extensively about them in the past, so we won't reiterate here. Clone Commandos saw action all throughout the Clone Wars, and we've discussed many of these missions already. But a discussion about Clone Commandos would be incomplete without discussion of the first Battle of Geonosis, in which all 10,000 of the original Clone Commandos were deployed, and nearly half of them died. This staggering casualty rate was largely the fault of Jedi Generals deploying Clone Commandos alongside units of ordinary clone troopers as elite soldiers, a job that Commandos were neither trained nor suited for. Some were used as actual Commandos, like Delta Squad, but many were not, and many died for it. After this disaster, the Jedi eventually figured out how to command units of Clone Commandos, though many Commandos never forgave the Jedi for Geonosis all the same. Throughout the Clone Wars, Commandos played an essential role on innumerable battlefronts, altering the tides of the entire war with sabotage operations and counter-terrorism ops on Coruscant. Over the course of the conflict, some Commandos, notably those of Omega Squad, began to question the war and their place in it. Dislike for the Jedi blossomed into distrust of the Republic, and some Commandos even deserted the GAR, with some faking their deaths to do so. Nonetheless, most Commandos remained loyal soldiers of the Republic. At the end of the Clone Wars, some Commandos participated in the execution of Order 66, while others refused to carry out the order. Some Commandos, such as the members of Delta Squad, went on to serve the Empire, some as Stormtrooper trainers and others just as Commandos. Under the Empire, the remaining Clone Commandos were rolled into the 501st Legion and almost exclusively deployed to hunt surviving Jedi, dissidents, and Jedi sympathizers alongside Lord Vader. However, many Commandos refused to serve the Empire and deserted after the end of the war, including members of Omega Squad. So that's everything you could possibly want to know about the Clone Commandos, the Republic's elite troopers. But what do you think? Which Commando squad is your favorite? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.